I hadn't stepped inside Ames Bradford Holdings in 5 years, but the marble floors still remind me. They gleamed under the harsh LED lights, too sterile to feel grand, too cold to feel like home. I paused just past the revolving doors, letting the echo of my heels ripple into the silence. A few heads turned. No one recognized me. That was the plan. The last time I stood here, my father's funeral had just ended. The boardroom door still bore the name Bradford. 3 weeks later, it vanished, scrubbed clean, replaced by Ames. They didn't even bother pretending I still belonged. A young receptionist, barely older than 22, squinted at her screen, then at me. Her voice wavered slightly. "Ma'am, are you here for an appointment?" "I'm here for the board meeting," I replied evenly, sliding off my sunglasses. "45th floor." She blinked rapidly. I don't see your name on the list." "Try again," I said, tone still pleasant. "Elena Bradford." Behind me, the elevator chimed, and a familiar voice sliced through the lobby. Well, well, look who finally decided to stop sulking. Grayson Ames. Tailored navy suit, pocket square too crisp to be accidental, smile sharp enough to draw blood. He strutted forward with all the entitlement of a man convinced the world was his inheritance. "Security?" he said smoothly to no one in particular. "I think we have a trespasser." I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped closer to the desk, watching the receptionist's cursor hover awkwardly. "Do you need my ID?" I asked. "Or will your system do the work for you?" The girl hesitated, eyes darting toward the internal directory. Then something flickered on her screen. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. Across the lobby, a pair of security guards approached, one already speaking into a lapel mic. "Elena, really," Grayson drawled. "This is pathetic. Crashing a shareholders' meeting you're no longer invited to? Honestly, I thought even you had more dignity." The receptionist cleared her throat. Sir? Grayson." Her name just updated. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "What?" "She's listed as a controlling shareholder," the girl said, her voice dropping into something almost reverent. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The guards paused mid-step. The air shifted. Grayson laughed, a short, brittle sound. "That's a glitch. I had IT redo all the permissions last Friday." "No," I said quietly, stepping toward him. "It's not a glitch. But by all means, have someone check." A man in a gray suit lingered near the far wall. Arthur Lang, still unreadable after all these years. His eyes met mine for half a second. No nod, no signal, just presence. He remembered. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A notification. Bradford Equity Trust, access confirmed. I didn't need to show it. Instead, I leaned just slightly closer to Grayson and dropped my voice. "Would you prefer I prove it here? Or upstairs? In front of everyone?" 4 years ago, my name disappeared from the boardroom. Today, it returns in ink they can't erase. The mahogany doors were just as heavy as I remembered. Their brass handles gleamed under the track lighting, but I knew better than to mistake polish for substance. This place had always worn a mask of dignity while bleeding ruthlessness underneath. I paused just outside the boardroom, letting the hush of the corridor settle around me. Muffled voices murmured beyond the doors. Executives trading updates, half-hearted jokes, coffee cups clinking against saucers. They were preparing for another quarterly meeting, unaware that the axis was about to tilt. A chill swept in as Victoria Ames rounded the corner. "Elena," she said, like tasting something sour. "You're not on the agenda." "I'm aware," I replied evenly, "but you'll find my presence quite valid." She stepped in front of the door, lips tight. Her red blazer was immaculate, her heels precise. Everything about her calculated, from her posture to the way she angled her chin just slightly downward to meet my eyes. "This is a private meeting for verified shareholders." I withdrew a slim envelope from my coat pocket, handing it to her with deliberate calm. "Notarized holdings certificate, effective as of this morning. 75.2% voting interest. Consolidated. She ripped it open with more aggression than necessary. As her eyes scanned the document, I caught the flicker, confusion colliding with fury. "You use shell companies," she whispered, as if the legality of it might collapse under volume. "No," I said, letting a faint smile rise. "I used foresight. My attorneys simply applied the structure your husband once used to shield his holdings from public exposure. Arthur might remember that setup well." Arthur Lang stood by the entrance, silent as always. His eyes met mine, just long enough to signal that yes, he did remember. He had helped my father design it. "Robert never intended to be survived by you?" I cut in gently. "Probably not, but here we are." Grayson emerged from the boardroom, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Elena," he tried, voice too cheerful. "Surely we can discuss this civilly." "I'm here for the meeting," I said simply. "You can verify with legal." A ripple of tension spread across the room as more board members noticed the standoff. A few shifted in their seats, murmuring to one another. Some whispered my name like it was a rumor that had returned to life. "Besides," I added, taking a step forward, "I believe Mr. Monroe will join us shortly." Victoria's eyes narrowed. Grayson checked his phone with growing urgency. Arthur pushed open the door as if to remind everyone that protocol, no matter how uncomfortable, still mattered. Then, like clockwork, every tablet on the board table buzzed. Heads tilted. Fingers tapped. An internal memo marked URGENTLEGAL filled the screens. Subject: Updated voting structure. To Ames Bradford Holdings Board. From Office of General Counsel. Effective immediately, per confirmed acquisition filings and registered trustee protocols, Ms. Elena Bradford is authorized for majority shareholder representation. Silence. Then rustling. Then the faint, unmistakable creak of power realigning itself. Victoria didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the document in her hand, knuckles pale. I stepped past her, pausing just inside the doorway, letting my gaze sweep across the room. They weren't ready. That was the point. I turned back to her, lips calm, words deliberate. "Shall we begin before the truth becomes even more uncomfortable?" I didn't come to beg for a seat. I came to flip the table if I had to. The boardroom had always been a stage. Polished glass table, digital panels embedded like eyes that watched everything, and 12 chairs that decided fates without flinching. Today, I didn't want a seat. I wanted the floor. Caleb Monroe stepped in, sharp in a charcoal gray suit, his presence cutting through the murmur like a scalpel. The room hushed. Even Victoria's posture stiffened at the sight of him. "Morning," he greeted with that same calm voice I remembered from childhood, when he'd read my father's contracts out loud while I doodled next to the fireplace. "Apologies for the delay. I had to stop by the clerk's office." He set a leather folio on the table and opened it slowly. Thick papers, tabbed and clipped, emerged with the reverence of something lethal. "Let's begin," I said, stepping forward. I reached into my coat and placed a slim tablet onto the table. One tap, and the room lights dimmed just enough for the projection to cast cleanly on the central screen. "This," I said, "is a 5-year breadcrumb trail. You'll see corporate registration filings, shareholder structures, and acquisition roll-ups from subsidiaries registered across Delaware, New Mexico, and the British Virgin Islands. Each entity acquired fractional stakes, carefully under SEC reporting thresholds. Together, they consolidated to form the Bradford Equity Trust I let the pause breathe. It now owns 75.2% of Ames Bradford Holdings." Grayson shifted in his chair, fingers twitching over his phone. "This is manipulation," he muttered. "You've loopholed your way into control." "No," I replied. "You don't get to lecture me on manipulation, not after this." Another tap. The screen flickered to a grainy black and white clip. Time-stamped security footage. Robert Bradford's private office, 10:44 p.m., the night before his heart attack. Grayson stood over our father's desk, finger jabbing the air. You're out of touch, Dad. Step down or I'll force the issue at the next meeting. Gasps. A chair creaked. Arthur lowered his gaze, lips pressed thin. Victoria's voice cut through. This is a violation of privacy and irrelevant to corporate. It's relevant when it speaks to motive, I said coldly. And if you're worried about privacy, you should consider the email you sent on March 2nd, 2020. Subject line, Accelerate Succession, Liability Concerns. Her knuckles whitened around the chair arm. I reached into the folio Caleb had opened. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed, thick, with Robert Bradford's distinct signature across the flap. This, I said, holding it up, is the original notarized will, never revoked, naming me the majority successor upon his incapacitation or death. Victoria's lips parted in disbelief. Filed this morning, Caleb added, with Cook County and the Illinois Secretary of State. Certified copies have already been sent to the SEC and the IRS. The weight in the room shifted. Subtle. Devastating. One board member pushed his chair back slightly. Another leaned forward, eyes wide, no longer hiding their shock. Monroe cleared his throat. Per documentation and legal filings, he said, voice crisp, Elena Bradford is, as of this morning, the sole voting majority owner of Ames Bradford Holdings. Silence. No applause, no protests. Just the quiet recoil of a dynasty buckling inward. I turned toward the table, toward those who had sat comfortably through my erasure. I suggest you start choosing which emails to delete before the SEC arrives. They thought I was a temporary nuisance. I was the contingency plan they never calculated for. The tension in the boardroom thickened, a suffocating presence that seemed to settle into every corner. At 10:15 a.m., with documents and legal papers now piling across the table, the battle for control had shifted from whispered threats to undeniable evidence. Victoria Ames rose sharply, her voice slicing through the quiet. This meeting is adjourned. We are not prepared for hostile theatrics. Her words fell flat against the steady rhythm of my calm. I pressed a button on the remote, and the room darkened just enough for the projection to glow sharply against the far wall. Before them floated a scanned copy of Robert Bradford's original will. Not some faded copy. Not a disputed document. The real, notarized, and unrevoked will naming me as the sole trustee of a private inheritance trust. A trust holding residual shares of Ames Bradford Holdings. A collective murmur swept through the board members. Some leaned forward, others exchanged anxious glances. Arthur Lang, standing beside me, nodded quietly. He was the man who had testified to the will's existence, but had been silenced by pressure in the aftermath of Robert's death. Now, freed from fear, his loyalty was unwavering. Grayson's facade cracked. His mouth opened and closed, searching for defense. Then, with panic breaking through, he blurted out, "That document wasn't even in the safe." I fixed him with a cold stare. "I never said it was in the safe, Grayson." The room held its breath as Caleb Monroe stepped forward, playing a recorded phone call between Victoria and an offshore attorney. The audio was clear. Victoria instructing delays on granting my legal access to the estate, attempts to keep me away from what was rightfully mine. Victoria's eyes flashed fury as she tried to discredit Monroe, calling into question the legality of the recording. But the damage was done. Board members shifted uneasily, some rising to request private meetings with the SEC. The grip Victoria held over the board was slipping fast. I stepped back from the table, my voice steady and sure as I delivered the final blow. "You didn't just erase me from the board. You forged the future, and I brought the receipts. Power never disappears. It only changes owners." The boardroom remained silent but for the distant ticking of the ornate clock on the wall. At 10:50 a.m., the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes upheaval. A sharp knock echoed from the heavy mahogany door. Heads turned as two sharply dressed federal agents stepped into the room. One from the FBI, the other representing the SEC. Their presence was an unspoken verdict. I rose, voice steady. "Please come in." Victoria's face paled. She attempted to make a swift exit, but a security guard intercepted her path with polite firmness. "You're not going anywhere," I said without looking back. The agents moved purposefully. One produced a thick stack of official documents and began serving freeze notices on company assets, especially those linked to offshore accounts and shell corporations. A murmur spread across the board members. One, pale-faced, tried to deny involvement in the suspicious transfers. I slid across a printed email chain from our corporate audit department. Detailed, time-stamped, and damning. Grayson's eyes flickered toward the door, panic overtaking his earlier composure. Before anyone could react, he sprang to his feet and bolted. Security was quicker. Strong hands grabbed his arms halfway, escorting him back as cuffs clicked. Caleb Monroe cleared his throat. "This investigation will expand beyond corporate fraud. Estate fraud and share manipulation are now under federal scrutiny." Victoria sank into her chair, trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, but not a single sob escaped. It was the cold, controlled breakdown of someone who knew the game was lost. Board members shifted uncomfortably, several casting furtive glances my way, some silently offering their allegiance. A moment later, Arthur Lang approached and gave a barely perceptible nod. He handed me a sealed letter. His resignation, a quiet surrender, a fresh start. The words he had scrawled on the envelope read, "You win. Clean house." The tide had turned. The players on the old board were crumbling one by one. This wasn't restoration. This was reclamation. The auditorium was filled with the quiet hum of anticipation. It was 1 p.m., the same day the boardroom had witnessed its fall from grace and the rise of something new. Employees from every department gathered, some curious, others apprehensive, awaiting the words that would redefine their future. I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights warming my skin. Behind me, the massive screen displayed the old company logo, Ames Bradford Holdings. With a final glance, it faded away, replaced by a new emblem, sleek, modern, and unyielding, Bradford Equity Group. "This company no longer belongs to the past," I began, voice steady yet resolute. "It belongs to all of us who believe in integrity, innovation, and shared success." I announced the launch of the Robert Bradford Foundation for Corporate Integrity, a fund created from the reclaimed offshore assets, dedicated to rooting out corruption, not just here, but across the industry. "No more kings," I said, "only stakeholders." A profit-sharing program was unveiled, designed to return value to the employees who had been exploited for far too long. As the crowd absorbed the news, the auditorium's doors quietly opened. Arthur Lang slipped in, his presence a silent pillar of support. Later, his letter was read aloud, a tribute to leadership and a thanks for correcting a lineage gone astray. That evening, back in my father's old office, the city lights flickered against the glass. My phone rang. Victoria's lawyer. They offered a plea deal, testimony against Grayson in exchange for leniency. I listened, then ended the call mid-sentence. "You don't get to trade truths for mercy. Not anymore." Standing by my father's framed photo, I gazed out over the skyline. The phone buzzed again. A rival CEO requesting a meeting. "He says you just changed the market," I whispered to the empty room. "Wants to know if you're for sale." I smiled faintly, closed the blinds, and let the night settle around me. Some battles end quietly, but the war I knew was just beginning. The final chapter left behind the echoes of a hard-fought battle, a quiet victory born from years of silent endurance. Justice, though delayed, found its way through the cracks of deceit and betrayal, reshaping the future for those who dared to claim it. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Sometimes it takes just one brave step to dismantle a fortress of lies and build a legacy of truth that no one can take away.